I think it's more important than ever to remind you that a piece of paper only has value if it's backed by something. And when we look at the US dollar, it is backed by its use on the international world stage, especially with oil. That's the number one factor. And the second factor that backs that piece of paper is the U.S. military. And that's why it shouldn't surprise a lot of people that we're seeing a lot of saber rattling and a lot of beating of the war drums, especially as we are seeing the United States military position itself against China and its allies. And we're going to be talking about that plus a lot more. There's a lot of propaganda that we will be breaking down here with, of course, Tim Picciott, the Liberty Advisor. But of course, all of this started just moments ago as Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "I have instructed the United States Navy to shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats if they harass our ships at sea." Very aggressive, hyperbolic statements by Donald Trump, which leaves a lot of people asking, why now during this crazy time? We're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. You would also think that would be against Twitter's terms and services, but that's a whole nother story in itself. But tensions are, of course, building between Iran and the United States, and they have been building for a very long time. As just right now, Iran has even officially announced that its Revolutionary Guard just successfully launched its first military satellite into space on Wednesday, which, of course, many American officials are warning could advance Iran's military and missile capabilities. And gee, you don't think so? But as these tensions are getting worse, it's important to ask very serious, legitimate questions, since, of course, the truth won't be spoken by the military industrial complex and, of course, the mainstream media that is influenced and, of course, has a lot of power from them. And one of the biggest questions that we're supposed to be asking right now is, what is this harassment? Well, Donald Trump, following that tweet, also tweeted this 33-second video showing one of these kind of harassments with his byline saying, quote, "Sleepy Joe thought this was okay, not me." And what you're seeing is a video from Press TV of an Iranian gunboat off the coast of Iran and some other military ship going by there. And this is the quote, harassment that's going to launch us into war. Why now? I'm at a loss for words, because again, none of this officially adds up to the story. But when you look at the bigger things happening behind the scenes, it really starts to kind of add up here. And we're going to get into oil prices and getting out of recession in just a little bit here with, of course, Tim. But I just want to break down some previous propaganda used by Donald Trump when also pushing this idea that we need to go against Iran. And one of the biggest kind of propaganda pieces was about an incident that happened on January 12th, 2016, when 10 American sailors were temporarily detained by Iran and then let go. The big propaganda by the United States military-industrial complex was that this was an egregious, embarrassing act by Iran, but they forget to tell you that these 10 American sailors had a navigation error and, of course, swam into Iranian territory on a spying mission. That's the type of stuff that, of course, we never hear about, but it's important to understand the full context of. And when you look at Iran on the map, you could see U.S. military installations, U.S. military bases, and many U.S. exercises carried out right along its border. And that's important to understand here because we're all being told that this is, quote, self-defense. Why are we in their waters? What kind of Iranian is a threat to me? We could talk about Saudi Arabia and their inspirations of Wahhabism that they spurred and financed with their mosques and schools all over the Western world that have been directly linked to attacks that have happened in the Western world. We could have that conversation, but no, we keep selling Saudi Arabia weapons. And of course, Saudi Arabia is one of the main enemies of Iran, since, of course, it plays off the big clash of civilizations between the Sunnis and Shias. Sunnis coming from Saudi Arabia, Shias, of course, coming from Iran. But that's another story. And it's not only Iran that we have to keep a close eye on now during these very turbulent, dangerous times. It's also Venezuela. yet another close ally to China. There's a lot of business deals with China and Venezuela. And we have to also understand here that not so long ago, just a few days ago, Donald Trump announced that he is deploying U.S. Navy vessels off the coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean, setting off another naval buildup in an alleged attempt to, quote, go after drug traffickers. But of course, many geopolitical experts show that this is a naval buildup most likely against Venezuela, and tensions already off the coast of Venezuela have been rising as, of course, a Venezuelan naval ship was sunk after ramming a cruise ship off its waters as well. And as the situation gets bad, we have to start really asking ourselves the question, why now? What is going on here? And that's why I wanted to throw it to you, Tim. What do you make of all this kind of talk about raising the price of oil, getting out of recession, especially when it comes to war?
I mean, it's funny that initially, like, part of what the 2001 Afghanistan buildup and then the subsequent Iraq buildup, that a lot of that had to do with, we're gonna lower your oil prices. Well, those low oil prices never really came until now, and now that we have low oil prices, the number one thing the government wants to do now is to make sure that we have higher oil prices. And so it's always, there's always, they can't even do that right. So they can't even get higher oil prices when that's the thing they're trying to do. And, I've talked about even before when Canada couldn't even, legally sell even cannabis, and they lost money doing that. So, I mean, you can't even have the government even doing things that where you think they'd be able to make money on. Now, you did make, a few things I did want to talk about. So you talked about what backs the dollar. Well, ultimately, one of the big things that you're missing from there is confidence. So confidence is really the biggest key and what really backs everything here, because without as soon as confidence is broken down and destroyed, the entire system crumbles. And for those of us like myself who went to government indoctrination centers, especially public ones, we learned that that war is basically good, and that war is what got us out of the Great Depression. And so I think that, and we've also heard that, war is the health of the state. And so I think what they're doing is they're using this propaganda to then say, that'd be a great way to get us out of this, current situation we're in. It's just, distract the people, get them into another war. And, has anyone told them, that oil apparently now is trading negative, and they're trying to, pay people to take oil off their hands? And so why are we paying all this money overseas to go guard oil fields in like Syria and Iraq and now soon to be Venezuela, or who the heck knows when? It's not even worth anything. So it's just, who's the government's financial advisor? Because they're constantly making terrible decisions when it comes to all this stuff, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at U.S. American foreign policy, especially with its adventures in Iraq, it absolutely makes no sense at all, especially with George W. Bush promising cheap oil prices as a result of this war. Well, look what's happening now. It absolutely is just completely
And didn't his dad co-own an oil field in Texas that like one of the other major partners on it was the Bin Laden family? I mean, I'm not looking. I didn't have it.
There was Arbusto oil, and of course, there's all those connections as well. That's important to highlight and bring up there. And of course, it's all a big business, and it's all a big show. But to me, I mean, really, I mean, now, I mean, don't we have enough to worry about at home without this kind of Henry Kissinger neoconservative doctrine just being shoved down our throats? Donald Trump also retweeted, I don't know if you could bring this up, this kind of meme about how to draw a red line. Why now? Why Iran? Should be the question that everyone's asking. And of course, this is the long neoconservative wet dream, is to get into a war with Iran. I still think it's going to happen in one way or another. Some people are predicting this summer. But already there's an economic war going on. There's, of course, sanctions that the United States is putting on Iran, closing them off from the international world market, which of course is making mainly Iranian people suffer. The United States doctrine with sanctions has been to put pressure on the local population, so the local population protests, and when they protest, they overthrow the bad leadership. That theory hasn't been working at all, especially in Venezuela. It hasn't been working in Cuba. It's not working in Iran. It's not going to work. It's only going to create a situation where random people are suffering. This is direct economic warfare by the United States on the Iranian people that we need to, of course, call out. It doesn't benefit anyone. And when you look at the larger geopolitical picture, this is all nonsensical unless you're looking for more chaos. Because if you're really going after, the bad guys here, the bad elements, the people who spur on a lot of these horrible attacks in the Western world, if you really want to go after terrorism, you'd go after the direct sponsors of that, not the Iranian forces that have been fighting a lot of the Sunni, Wahhabist, ISIS, Al-Qaeda elements all throughout the Middle East. And that's something that's important to notice here. Now, Iran also is very, aggressively set against Israel. Israel is also aggressively set against Iran. And that's why it's been so perplexing to see this kind of alliance between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, because it absolutely is nonsensical, non-beneficial to the United States at all, but detrimental to us. And when we look at Donald Trump, we got to understand he's not a peacenik. He bombed Syria. He went far more aggressive than his previous predecessor, Barack Obama, who, by the way, Barack Obama dropped around 100,000 bombs in 7 countries. Donald Trump so far dropped 73,000 bombs so far, and his presidency is still not over. And those are just some of the preliminary numbers. We're not getting the full numbers yet. And to bring some context in, Bush dropped about 70,000 bombs in 5 countries. And now we have Donald Trump aggressively taking out and assassinating Iranian leaders, bombing Syria, and now threatening to get rid and bomb and to, as people are calling, shoot down. People are making fun of that statement. If you could pull up some of the memes associated with it, since again, you can't really shoot down boats since they're not flying. But Donald Trump is essentially threatening to aggressively attack another nation. And this should be pushed back. And anything could happen here, especially with how unpredictable Donald Trump has been with his foreign policy, which again has been very aggressive in some points and some other points have not. But don't be surprised if Donald Trump gets us in another conflict with Iran, because I think that possibility is very likely.
And wasn't it just like days ago that there was a general who was sending out a message saying, don't mess with us right now. Like, now is not the time to mess with us when everyone has the coronavirus. And it almost sounds like this big, again, going back to confidence, it's all this big confidence game that they're trying to play. And it's basically like the exact opposite of Teddy Roosevelt, where it's, speak softly and carry a big stick. We're here. We have no stick. We've got, all this, basically, we're just weighted down by all this debt over here. And, the military is probably, barely hanging on. Yeah, we've got a lot of nuclear weapons. Yeah, we have the ability to destroy the world, probably thousands of times over. But eventually, what is it for? I mean, it's globalist, 0.01% in America, fighting against, global, basically allied with, 0.01% over in other places in the Middle East. And obviously none of this has to do with actually helping out any of the people. So, and the other thing is, you made a good point about defensive weapons. Oh, these are just defensive weapons, especially, in regards to Russia. Well, I can put a defensive, gun to your face, like hypothetically speaking, but, does it feel defensive to you? No, that's going to be taken on as a gigantic threat, as it should be. And then also, you brought up points with Saudi Arabia. If we are going to, basically with what happened, again, obviously, Luke, you're the, ground zero when it comes to 9/11 research. But, even if you go by the official story, which obviously we know is not true, it was the Saudis that, what was it, like 17 of the 19 hijackers, and yet then the response is then go attack all of Saudi Arabia's enemies. It's got to be the dumbest policy ever. But I think a lot of this has to do with, and then we talked about the red line also. Especially when it comes to the Syrian red line. That was the day. I used to have a 6'2" life-size Donald Trump behind me, and I hate even admitting that. My wife at the time ended up giving it to me as a birthday present, but it used to scare the crap out of me when I used to walk into my office and not realize it was there. But anyways, with this, that was the day I moved it out, gave it to somebody else, because I was like, listen, if you're gonna go fall for the same mainstream media narrative BS crap about because white helmets and Assad's gassing his own children, and everyone is watching this knows that that's all crap. But now to see him just falling for the same stuff, and to see the neocons, the conservatives who don't trust any of the media, but now they trust the media when it comes to, what's going on with the war drums. And then also, I'll just make one last point here is, remember that, the only time we really heard the media talk, very nicely about Donald Trump was in regards to, oh, look how presidential he looks. He's going and bombing Syria and he's bombing this people. And then, I guess, I'll have one other last point is, today is April 22nd. And so it is actually the anniversary of, Pat Tillman passing away. So, I am in Arizona. He's, a legend over here. I moved here after the fact, but, there was a Pat Tillman run a couple of days ago that's been going on for years. And I also want to point out that in the Pat Tillman story, so here I am on the Wikipedia page. Pat Tillman was a defensive back with the Arizona Cardinals, but decided to walk away from a multi-million-dollar contract to go to Afghanistan in 2002. After Tillman was killed, an investigation showed that he died by friendly fire. Tillman's family says that they learned weeks later that the inspiring story that the military had publicized was false. And then you guys can go over here, watch the trailer called The Tillman Story. I'd actually just recommend going and watching the entire video, because essentially what the government did is they trotted out saying, hey, this guy was a hero. He went and stormed this, this huge, enemy's nest of all these guys with machine guns. And then, he died in a guns ablaze. When what really happened is he was killed by friendly fire. And then those lies went all the way up to the White House. And so the media is always lying, because they knew that Pat Tillman was writing letters saying that this whole thing was BS, that everything that we had been, propagandized to get us into war was all complete BS. And it was hard not to swear on this family-friendly show, but it just makes me so mad seeing this stuff going on. And I know I've got a smile here, but it just makes me so mad seeing this stuff going on.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Pat Tillman story, the Jessica Lynch story, and so many other stories, particularly Pat Tillman that you just brought up, and today is the anniversary of his death, and he should be remembered. He should be praised. I mean, that man really went above and beyond. And if there ever is a story that you should really look at that highlights how you should mistrust the government, the media, the U.S. military-industrial complex, it is the Pat Tillman story. Look into that story, and you'll never see the same kind of war propaganda in the same way. Because, again, war propaganda is sold to us in so many different ways. And many people are pointing out that the tensions between the United States and China are rising. They are. People are pointing out the possibility that there could be a conflict between China and the United States. Of course, that's what historically happens with the Thucydides trap, with a new emerging superpower threatening an existing one. But I think what we're going to see here more likely, especially with the United States doubling down and positioning itself militarily against its allies, what we're most likely going to see is some kind of proxy kind of small conflict unfold between either Iran or Venezuela, with, of course, China backing one side, the United States backing another. And I think that's going to be the more realistic scenario that's going to be unfolding here from our kind of unique perspective on this. Anything else you want to say about this specifically? When I got to change my camera here really quickly.
No, I mean, just the last thing would be that, the war does not get us out of recessions. It was actually when the troops came home from World War I, and the troops were then coming home and spending money. Same thing with World War II, that it was when the war ended is what got us out of the recession. And so that is just a quick piece of propaganda. I see Luke did fix his camera, but yeah, that's all I've got. And, we could probably go on to the next video. Actually, one last thing is also highly recommend you guys check out the video that we shot yesterday called Oil versus Gold, or Money Won't Be Worth the Papers is Printed on Ballots, Oil and Gold, to get much more context to everything that is going on with the oil situation right now, Luke.
Yep. Truly unprecedented times. The war machine, the war propaganda needs to be called out. If you believe so, share this video with your friends and family members, because you're definitely not going to get this side, this perspective, this kind of news anywhere else, than here on this independent media organization. You're definitely not going to get it from the boob tube, from the mainstream media that, of course, is just pushing this. They're going to be congratulating and cheering Trump on, as they usually do whenever he does promote a very neoconservative Henry Kissinger doctrine that, of course, endangers lives and could potentially hurt all of us. It's time we stand up. It's time we call it out. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more here on Change the News.